These concrete structures that run through Huntington Reservation are the trestle remains for the Lakeshore Electric rail line. Between 1893 and 1938, the Lakeshore Electric provided convenient and fast rail service to and from downtown Cleveland to points west all the way to Toledo. My great-great-grandfather, Jacob Wagner, lived on lakefront property at Avon, Ohio, and commuted daily to his business in Cleveland, Ohio over this trestle. Some interesting stories about Jacob Wagner have a connection to the Lakeshore Electric, possibly the Huntington property as well. Jacob immigrated from Switzerland in the 1850s. He served in the Civil War as a guard at Johnson's Island POW camp. With his brother, Jacob founded the Wagner Awning Company on the near west side of Cleveland. When the Soldiers and Sailors Monument was being designed, requests were circulated looking for Civil War veterans who still had and could fit into their uniforms. As a result, Jacob posed for one of the figures that make up the four scenes of the monument. Here's the figure on the east side of the monument where a group of soldiers are loading a cannon. Jacob is the individual directing the fire, one arm extended and a pair of binoculars in his other hand. We know this because the binoculars he possessed while posing reside with me today. Around the turn of the century, Jacob's company was hired to provide the awnings for J.D. Rockefeller's new summer home being constructed in Cleveland Heights. At one point, while he was installing the awnings, he met Rockefeller, who asked Jacob if he could identify the most distant point of land jutting out into Lake Erie to the west. Jacob told Rockefeller that the land was Avon Point, and that his house was on the lake at Avon Point. The story goes, passed along by my great-aunt, Jacob's granddaughter, Rockefeller was invited to visit our home on Avon Point, where on a clear day one could look back and see Cleveland Heights. One evening, Rockefeller arrived in his motor car, and when he stepped out of the car, I presented him with a bouquet of flowers. These pictures of the Rockefeller and Huntington summer homes show Jacob's workmanship, as both houses show awnings in use. While there is no mention of it in our family history, we can assume that Jacob also knew John Huntington, and clearly he passed through the Huntington property daily on his way to work, using the Lakeshore Electric across the trestles in Bay Village. The next three generations of Wagners are connected to these trestle remains, as Jacob's son, Frank, and his son, Edward, and his son, Robert, my father, all traveled over the structure frequently. In our family, my dad preserved the Lakeshore Electric through hand-built O-gauge trolley cars, which he constructed in the late 1940s. My father was a skilled model maker and railroad enthusiast. During his high school years, he had built an O-gauge model railroad of a Baltimore and Ohio passenger train that ran throughout the basement of his parents' home in Akron, Ohio. Following the war, my dad returned from active service in the U.S. Army, where he participated in the Battle of Okinawa. While in college, he used various parts of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad models to construct and power his newly created Lakeshore Electric cars. I was born into a house with a basement layout and the sound of steel wheels passing over brass rails and the rhythmic click caused by the wheels passing the rail connections. Each hand-built car was driven by an electric motor powered through an overhead copper wire. Years and several houses later, I would work with my dad to bring the Lakeshore Electric alive again in the basement of our house in Madison, Ohio. All that remains today is this brief, poorly focused 16mm home movie and section of a track and the four well-used trolley cars as seen in this display.